HARDtalk is on the road in Kazakhstan, a vast country of mountains, of plains, which was for years a remote outpost of the Soviet Empire. And now it is a country of extraordinary change, a crossroads linking China, Russia, and Europe far to the west.
Kazakhstan has been transformed by oil wealth, with a new capital city, ambitious infrastructure, and the Silk Road reimagined for 21st century trade. Pulling the strings of power, one man, dominant, seemingly immovable, President Nursultan Nazarbayev, the only leader post-Soviet Kazakhstan has ever known. Many of those who demand political freedom and human rights are systematically silenced. Soviet habits are hard to break. Now Kazakhs are wondering what comes after Nazarbayev. Has Kazakhstan's growth been built on firm foundations? In the Kazakh language, Astana means capital. In just 20 years, this city has risen from the empty steppes. These showpiece buildings are monuments to the country's commodity riches, oil, gas and minerals. Now, Kazakhstan is determined to diversify. You get quite a view from the boardroom of Astana's new International Financial Center. The CEO here is aiming to create a financial hub in Central Asia to rival Singapore, Hong Kong, and Dubai.
What we're doing right now in Astana International Financial Center, we are trying to build all sorts of alternative vehicles, alternative instruments to attract investment into the economy. And we're building the stock market, capital market from the scratch. And we have a chance, good chance, to avoid mistakes others were doing in other jurisdictions to build the financial hubs.
You're also doing something else. You're sending a signal to potential investors. They're going to get the most enormous tax breaks, as I understand it, a 50-year exemption from corporate and income taxes. What kind of business people do you think that's really going to appeal to? I mean, possibly Russian oligarchs, Chinese oligarchs?
It's not only problems within the Russian oligarchs, I would say. There are problems with United States citizens and UK citizens across the world. As the AFC, we're also emphasizing to be much more transparent than any other financial center. So we don't want to put us into the map as a purely offshore jurisdiction.
To attract international investors, Kazakhstan needs credibility.
What we have, as you'd expect in a typical court, is
which is why British lawyer Christopher Campbell-Holt is here. British common law in a court supervised by British judges has been adopted inside Astana's financial centre. In a country plagued by corruption, this counts as judicious reassurance.
What we have done is a genuine, committed project with a court and an international arbitration centre which genuinely applies the highest international standards. This is not a veneer or a window dressing exercise. We've worked very hard with the most respected advisors, with Lord Wolfe, the former Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales, as our Chief Justice.
The names involved are highly respected in England, but we're not in England, we're in Kazakhstan, and the ultimate authority in Kazakhstan is right there. The picture says it all. The president of Kazakhstan is overseeing your court, and in this system, his word is the ultimate authority, not English common law.
I'm not in a position to comment on politics, but what I can say is the absolute robust integrity of our judges. They would not be here and they would not stay here if there was not a genuine commitment to strict adherence to the rule of law and independence for our court and also for our International Arbitration Centre.
Christopher, you've been here for a year and a half. How many cases have you dealt with?
We have not received a case yet. That is to be expected, but we are getting very promising early signs in a way that other financial centres around the world in other emerging markets can truthfully not say was their experience.
Kazakhstan's rise from poor to middle-income nation has been managed by Nursultan Nazarbayev. He was a steelworker who rose through the ranks of the Soviet Communist Party and seized his opportunity when the USSR collapsed. His election victories are coronations, not contests. Last time around, he won 97% of the vote. That doesn't seem to trouble Western leaders, who see him as a bulwark of stability and an economic partner. Now the president is driving a process of economic transformation, from commodities to trade, taking advantage of Kazakhstan's proximity to the most dynamic economic engine on Earth, China.
For me, traveling the Silk Road has always conjured up images of adventure and romance, but this is the reality today, a 4-lane brand new superhighway that slices through the Kazakh steppes. And this new Silk Road is all about China's ambition to be the dominant global economy of the 21st century.
Imagine what Marco Polo would have made of this. Korgos dry port towers over the Silk Road on Kazakhstan's eastern frontier. 5 years ago, this was empty steppe.
Моя работа очень серьезная, очень ответственная. У нас может быть... нравится, да? В целом, конечно, да.
Now, Chinese rail freight rolls in, gets transferred onto Kazakh gauge track, and can be in Europe within a dozen days, halving shipping times.
If you look on a world atlas, this is one of the most inaccessible, the most remote places on Earth. And yet it is now a key strategic gateway through which China sends its exports into Central Asia and all the way into Europe. If you want to know what the Chinese mean by one belt, one road, well, this is it.
Recreation of the new Silk Road brings positive impacts not only to Kazakhstan but also to other countries. And our dry port plays one of the crucial roles
in this relationship between China and Kazakhstan, which created this amazing new facility. The power really lies with China, doesn't it?
It's not something that we should fear about. On one hand, yes, we depend on the volume.
We depend on China. China owns 49% of this facility in Kazakhstan. China basically is behind this entire project.
Well, they are our partners. This partnership brings benefits for either sides, for Kazakh and the Chinese side.
Kazakhstan's embrace of China is most evident at the border crossing itself. The two countries have set up a free trade zone and have begun to build a new city, which will combine trade, manufacturing, casinos, and theme parks. Kazakhs already journey here by the busload to buy cheap Chinese goods tax-free.
Так, мы из Алматы. Ну, приехали, наверное, уже раз третий. Ну, так, чисто для дома. Шопингом не занимаемся.
How much money can you save here?
Ну, дешевле в 2 раза, чем в Алмате.
20 minutes drive from the Korgos border project is the Kazakhstan international investors don't get to see. Rural life, untouched by the new Silk Road. And the poor no longer have the safety net communism provided. Almaty was Kazakhstan's administrative capital in the Soviet era. It still has a size and a buzz that Astana lacks. And it's here you feel the tensions that swirl under this country's surface calm.
This man's presence looms over pretty much everything in Kazakhstan. It's not just the statues, it's not just the streets named after him. There's also a Nazarbayev University, there's a Nazarbayev mountain, there's even a flower that's been named after the president. And after almost 3 decades in power, it's pretty much impossible for Kazakhs to imagine life without him.
As you know, our president is the first one from our independence.
That's right. So almost 30 years in power.
Yes, and actually we didn't see any other variants, real variants.
But isn't there a part of you that would like to see something different?
It's much bigger part inside of me that is afraid that a new one will be much, much worse.
Really?
Yes.
You're actually frightened
Yes.
of what change might bring?
Yes, I'm frightened of the change.
Because you think Kazakhstan could become unstable? You know, do you fear that you look at Ukraine, you look at other countries,
Yes.
you think that could happen here?
Yes, yes, I'm really afraid of this.
Last month, the Nazarbayev regime gave a glimpse of its iron fist. Small groups of protesters demanded the release of dozens of political prisoners in several Kazakh cities. Paramilitary police squads rounded them up and took them away.
В тот день сотрудники спецподразделения МВД-РК просто подошли, пытались скрутить руки, но я не позволил им и затолкали в автобус.
I met Yerlan Kaliyev days after his release from detention after those May 10th protests. With him was one of Kazakhstan's most prominent human rights activists, Yevgeny Zhovtis.
Yevgeny, it seems like the actions of a police state, and yet here I am talking to you in public. That's not a police state. Explain to me what's going on.
It's very complicated. It looks like it's some kind of hybrid authoritarianism. We have not seen this, or imitation democracy with the authoritarian features. It's something very strange. Our authorities are very nervous about the Orange Revolutions, Arab Springs, and they're afraid that any kind of such kind of protest, even small one, could bring to more larger events which could challenge them.
This word, the magic word freedom, it doesn't really mean in Kazakhstan anything like what it means in the West.
Of course, no. Not, and the problem is that not by the government and not by the people. And not by the people.
You mean the people don't want it?
Yes. Because the people have no ability to express any kind of freedom for 70 years. And now this is still the same. They are not looking at freedom as having certain value, bringing something change for their real life, and they are still looking at the state as the father, mother, grandfather, and grandmother.
Right.
The problem is that when you have this system, it is not the rule of law, it's rule by law. And the rule by law do not provide the sustainable system which is governed by law, where there is no corruption, where you could achieve certain justice in judiciary and so on. And all these things, sooner or later, could bring, from my point of view, negative results, because it's authoritarian regime with a good economical development, but these economical results are not going to the society, it's going to the elite. It's practically working for the leadership. It's kleptocracy to a certain extent.
Only once over the past 3 decades has Kazakhstan experienced serious unrest. In late 2011, oil workers in the west of the country went on strike, demanding better conditions. The government response to their protests was ruthless. At least 15 strikers were shot dead by police. The clashes fueled a wave of internal opposition. I arranged to meet one political opponent of the regime whose efforts to investigate that 2011 violence led him to spending 4.5 years in prison. He didn't want to talk in Almaty. He asked me to follow his car into the hills surrounding the city, where he could talk more freely. Vladimir Kozlov was locked up for inciting social unrest and trying to overthrow the regime.
Конечно же, это неправда. Это то, что придумали следователи Комитета национальной безопасности для того, чтобы ликвидировать оппозиционную партию, воспользоваться таким поводом, как ее участие в помощи нефтяникам. Я думаю, что президенту сейчас вообще инакомыслие представляется государственным преступлением. То есть, и поэтому он убирает с политического поля всех тех игроков, которые не поддерживают сегодня его позицию, его политику. Но сам Назарбаев из советского прошлого не ушел, по моему мнению. Мышление и структура управления страной остались советскими.
But look at the reality. Last election of President Nazarbayev, he won 97% of the vote. How are you going to change this picture?
Я думаю, что то, что Назарбаев выигрывает выборы с почти 100%, на самом деле это не победа, потому что для абсолютного большинства казахстанцев очевидно, что это не выборы. И с каждым годом все больше людей уверены в том, что что-то нужно менять.
Do you feel trapped and do you feel frightened for your own security in this country today?
Я не чувствую себя в безопасности, но и не боюсь режима. Я бы хотел просто, чтобы мои усилия каким-то образом помогли моей стране стать иной. То есть перестать быть авторитарной, стать по-настоящему демократичной, чтобы в ней было комфортно всем, кто в ней живет.
Compared to the other post-Soviet Central Asian republics, Kazakhstan is a success story, relatively stable, with vast economic potential. But one-man rule brings long-term risk.
In the coffee shops and watering holes of Kazakhstan, one topic of political conversation dominates all others. Who will succeed President Nazarbayev? They've even made a pack of playing cards depicting the key members of the Kazakh elite, and presumably one of this lot will eventually emerge triumphant.
Whatever he promised.
The Kazakh government is determined to make the country a member of the Rich World Club by 2050. But who will lead them to that promised land? And what kind of political system will get them there?
You talk about modernization and change coming to your country. One thing that hasn't changed for 27 years is the identity of your leader. Do you think that is a source of strength or actually a source of vulnerability?
Take a look around, including this Astana city, and everything happened during the tenure and presidency of Mr. Nursultan Nazarbayev. You can, you can go out to approach any Kazakh ordinary citizen and put him a question about President Nazarbayev, about his authority, about his popularity, about deeds.
Well, if you're so confident of the feelings of the people and their absolute support for Mr. Nazarbayev, why does the government appear so frightened of allowing them to express themselves freely? You must know the case of Vladimir Kozlov, for example, the former leader of the Alga political party. He was locked up for 4.5 years, spent best part of a year in solitary confinement.
We are in constant negotiations and dialogue with human rights, watchdogs, with the civil society, with Western NGOs on that matter. And I will tell you not only the name of
their message is the same
Mr.
as
Kozlov.
mine.
No, it's not only Mr. Kozlov. There are some other names mentioned by our Western counterparts. And
yeah, because you've locked people up for expressing dissident views online. I just wonder whether, like me, you have watched the videos of black-clad, balaclava-wearing special police units arresting people on May the 10th because they had the temerity to demand the release of political prisoners. Have you seen those videos?
Saying honestly, I missed all this kind of video shortage, but I believe that each and every democratic society, based on its national legislation, there are some procedures, to organize such meetings. And you agree with me that it took centuries, for example, before genuine democracy had arrived in Europe. So we are on the way. I assure you, we are in quite very much progressive way.
Well, it's not me you need to assure, it's your own people. Corruption is still systematic in this country and clearly goes to the very top of government.
If you come across our mass media in Kazakhstan, every day you have some reports about some corruption case involving really very high top officials. But this is exactly what my government implementing by the instruction of president. One of that institutional reforms, it's about rule of law. So rule of law, this is one of the, today critical criteria for assessing the work of our government.
We know, Foreign Minister, that Mr. Nazarbayev's own family has amassed vast wealth in this country. So too his close associates, some of his closest allies. Hand on heart, how do you think they acquired all that money?
Is it strange? Is it only in my society, in Kazakhstan? It's also common, I think, for any other country. If people have some ability, if people commercially oriented, if they have some capacity to express themselves through doing business. It's an open market, free market, where each and every individual, including members of my family or other families, have opportunity to do business.
What's not open is the political system. You now have a law which says that no candidate can run for president without having spent at least 5 years inside the government as a state official, which of course means that opposition people who are not in the government cannot possibly run for president.
What is wrong with that?
What is wrong with that? It's a denial of basic democracy.
With that provisions in our legislation. There are some provisions in our legislation, the same with the legislation of any other sovereign independent
But what
country.
you have is legislation which ensures the authoritarian culture remains.
I tell you that, for example, our constitution, basic law of my country, was drafted with a engagement of renowned international experts. It very much depends on a particular country, particular system, and legislation.
A final thought then, and it goes back to something we discussed earlier. No question, Kazakhstan has seen tremendous economic growth, and its strategic importance is now recognized around the world, from Beijing to Moscow to Washington. So the question is this: what happens when Mr. Nazarbayev goes?
Nothing will happen that dramatic. I tell you, we will make sure that all achievements, all accomplishments have been reached during the tenure with President Nazarbayev, who I very much hope will continue to run this country if he wishes, and he will undoubtedly receive the overwhelming above-mentioned majority of votes. We will make sure that all these
basically, your message to me is don't think about what happens next, because he's going to keep running and running and running.
It's up to him. It's up to him, and it's up to our people of multi-ethnic, multi-confessional population of my country, which I'm very proud of, and I'm quite confident they are proud of their president.
For 27 years, Kazakhs have mostly accepted their president's mantra, stability before democracy. But time is catching up with the father of the nation. And Kazakhs must decide, will the old rules outlast the man who made them?